Welcome to the launch of Arukah Animal International, whose mission it is to bring an end to animal exploitation and suffering through advocacy, awareness, and the arts. Arukah is an organization that views animals as the creators of their own lives and seeks to contribute to a world in which animals are treated with dignity and respect. You can find out more about the organization on their website. You can find a link in the chat. And definitely go and check out the website. It's very, very cool. And while you are there, make sure that you sign the pledge. Now, I would certainly want everyone to go dairy-free all the time, always. But the pledge is asking for a modest commitment to go dairy-free at least one day a week. And I think even if you are already dairy-free and you don't drink any milk at all, go over there and sign the pledge. What we're trying to do is gain some critical mass, get a conversation rolling, to try and talk about dairy consumption and what it means and its devastating impacts. And an extra reason why you should definitely go check it out and put your name down is there are prizes. And I know it seems a bit weird kind of blending these things two things together, but there are some awesome prizes for you to possibly get your hands on. These were organized by Robin Dorman, the president and executive director at Arukah Animal International, and Greg Tully, a strategy consultant. They've organized a whole host of books from the panelists, as well as art and other bits and bobs as giveaways. So go over, check out the website, sign the pledge, and winners will be announced within the next week. While you're there, you might also notice a small donation button. Arukah relies on donations, so feel free to support the organization that way too. Now, I've just launched straight into things, and I fear that I'm speaking a bit too quickly, so I'm going to slow down. A little bit about me. My name is Claudia Hertenfelder. I'll be the moderator for today's events. I am the founder, producer, and host of the Animal Turn podcast, and it gives me a great pleasure to be with you today. Robin and Greg are helping behind the scenes, and so is Sydney Parks, the Youth Coalition coordinator, and she's managing all of the technical communication stuff, including the streaming and everything. She's really amazing. Thank you also to Jeff Dorman for the music that came up at the beginning of this event. Just a little bit about how things are going to go today. So I'm going to briefly introduce each of the panelists in a moment. Then we're going to show you a 3-minute video. And immediately after that, we're going to launch into a panel discussion. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. You can pop your questions into the chat and they're going to be collated. And then Greg's going to give them back to me to present to the panelists a little bit later in the conversation. So introduction, video, conversation. That's what things are going to look like today. And you can put everything directly into the chat. Just a reminder that things are being recorded. And if you like what you're hearing or you hear something that you think is pretty cool, feel free to share it via social media using #ArukahLaunch, which you can also find in the chat. Okay. So a little bit about the panelists today. First up, we have, and I'm doing it in alphabetical order because they're all amazing and I couldn't decide which order to go in. So alphabet always works. So first up, we've got Annie Potts. So Annie is a professor on human animal studies and is the co-director of the New Zealand Centre for Human Animal Studies at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch. She's also the author of several books, including Chicken, as well as a New Zealand book for beasts, animals in our culture, history, and everyday life. She is currently working on a book called Possum Tales, which focuses on the cultural histories of opossums and possums in the Americas and Australasia, which I think is really, really cool. Possums just fascinate me to no end. Then we've got Dana Ellen, who's a full-time painter in Washington, D.C., whose work offers a colorful critique of social norms. Her vegan-themed art is collected by animal rights activists, history buffs, and a growing number of art enthusiasts. And I can tell you why, because it's really, really awesome. It's definitely go check it out. It feels both uncomfortable and beautiful at exactly the same time. So definitely go check out her website too. Then we've got Esther the Wonder Pig and her companions, Steve Jenkins and Derek Walter. Esther is a 650-pound pig who has over 1 million followers on social media and who inspired Steve and Derek to go vegan and launch a farm sanctuary called the Happily Ever Esther Farm Sanctuary, which is home to pigs, cows, chickens, ghosts, equines, sheep, rabbits, and cats. Really incredible. And then two more. We've got Jeff Sebo, who is a clinical associate professor of environmental studies and an affiliated professor of bioethics, medical ethics, philosophy, and law at New York University. He is also the author of the book, Saving Animals, Saving Ourselves, and he co-authored Food, Animals, and the Environment. Jeff is a board member of Minding Animals International and a mentor at Sentient Media. And finally, Mark Beckhoff is a professor emeritus of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Colorado. He's published 31 books, won many, many awards for his research on animal behavior. And he is also the co-chair of the ethics committee at the Jane Goodall Institute. One of his latest books, which I think has to be one of the best titles of a book ever, is A Dog's World, Imagining the Lives of Dogs in a World Without Humans. And he regularly contributes to Psychology Today. You should read his Psychology Today pieces. I kind of read them before I buy a book to get a sense of whether those are books I want to read. So definitely go check out Psychology Today. So that's our awesome panel. I'm going to give them a round of applause all by myself in my living room. And I hope that you are clapping too. But yeah, that's the kind of formalities done. I'm thrilled to be with all of you here today. And we're going to go straight into a video and then we're going to go into the conversation.
Everyone loves the delicious taste of
a small batch, slow-smoked, mouth-watering,
crispy bacon.
Bacon is good for me.
Open wounds, pressure sores, infections, bleeding gums from biting the bars so much.
Imagine what a pig farm in the future would be like? A company in Ezhou City, central China's Hubei province, is raising pigs in a 26-story building. The annual output can reach 600,000.
You're looking at a lake of toxic pig feces and urine, the size of 4 football fields. In North Carolina alone, there are over 2,000.
So you would have seen in your screen there are a whole bunch of images of kind of pigs in crates and asking, I think, pretty powerful questions. And it's interesting to kind of watch a short video about pigs at the moment because a recent law has just been upheld. And Jeff, maybe you can help me here because I don't have the right language when it comes to speaking about this. But Proposition 12 was recently spoken a bit about in California. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So this is arguably the biggest animal welfare case that ever made it to the United States Supreme Court, the, of course, most important court in the United States. And the basic summary of the case is that in 2018, California voters passed a ballot initiative known as Proposition 12. And this ballot initiative basically set new space requirements for farmed animals. So for example, egg-laying hens or veal calves, some other animals, there are now minimum space requirements for their confinement. And California bans the sale of animal products that come from production methods that do not meet its new minimum space requirements. And obviously this is not going to, save farmed animals, save public health, save the environment. But the thought is that this can be at least a little bit better for animal welfare and a little bit better for public health, because more confinement equals more stress, equals weakened immune systems, equals more disease spread. So this is supposed to be good, not great, but good for animal welfare and good for public health. But the pork producers brought a legal case against Proposition 12. And without going into the legal weeds, the basic issue is that they alleged that Proposition 12 interfered with interstate commerce. So the United States Congress is empowered to regulate interstate commerce. And some people have thought that means that states are not empowered to regulate interstate commerce. And so when a state passes a law that has economic implications that extend beyond its borders, then one might ask, is this a state kind of flexing its muscles and trying to regulate what happens with producers in other states? Because California is a huge state. It consumes a lot of the food in the nation. And so if it says you got to meet our space requirements to sell your meat here, that means producers in every other state in the United States, they have to make a choice. Either they conform to California standards or they are no longer able to sell to a major market and they have to forego that opportunity. So the pork producers alleged that this was California improperly interfering with producers in other states. It went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And in a somewhat surprising decision, the United States Supreme Court rejected this allegation, upheld Proposition 12. And so Proposition 12 remains in place, it remains in force, it remains the case that in order to sell meat in California, you have to meet these minimum space requirements. Now, is this definitely a victory for pigs in and of itself or for farmed animals in and of itself? Maybe, maybe not. It really all depends on the details because there are a lot of loopholes, a lot of pork that can still be sold in California. A lot of producers might choose not to conform with its standards, or they might choose to conform with them. People who eat less pork might start eating more chicken, right? So this is all very complicated, but it is a major victory that the Supreme Court has upheld the idea that states are permitted to ban the sale of meat on animal welfare and public health grounds, preserving that option for further progress towards regulations that can meaningfully limit what we can do for animals for food. That is a major victory, independently of the direct effects of Proposition 12.
Incredible. So if I understand you correctly, the Proposition 12 was asking for more space, or were there no regulations prior to this? Was it just industry could decide how much space the pigs had? Or is it now Proposition 12 has said that pigs now have to have more space in California than what they would have in other states?
I'm not sure what the status quo was prior to Proposition 12 in California. I do know that Proposition 12 was the first law to go this far and to specifically ban the sale of products rather than to simply regulate production methods in state. I think that it went farther. My understanding is that it went farther, both in terms of the details, but then also in terms of banning products sold in other states instead of simply banning certain production methods in state.
And I think that that's really good to kind of now have in your mind. So when you're seeing this video with the kind of pigs in these crates, these are the spaces that pigs kind of normally have. I think having you kind of speak a bit there, Jeff, really helped to frame that a little bit more. And you mentioned maybe people are going to switch now from pigs to chickens. And Annie, maybe I could bring you in here and speaking about chickens, because we speak about, you know, the next pandemic kind of coming. But when we talk about pandemics, we tend to think of how it impacts humans, right? Like what disease is going to next impact humans. But in fact, both pigs and chicken populations across the world have been devastated in the last couple of years because of outbreaks. And I know you know a lot about chickens. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how chickens are impacted in this type of climate.
Well, as people might know or might not know, there are two types of key types of chickens that are exploited. There are those that are exploited for eggs, and then the kinds of chickens that are bred and exploited for meat. Most people know about the hen laying, the egg laying hens and their exploitation, because it's much easier for activists to show how, you know, their environments are cramped and noisy and really are disgusting for any living being to live in. But people who eat meat that comes from chickens don't tend to know about that the chickens they're eating are actually different. They're baby chicks, so when they go off to slaughter, they're, you know, about 6 weeks old or even younger. They're still cheeping for their mothers. They have baby feathers still on. They can't stand anymore because they've been bred to grow faster, to grow, you know, explosively grow their muscles really fast, so they can be slaughtered really soon after hatching, so that they can make a lot of profit. You know, it's efficient for them to die quickly and the cycle to continue. The sheds that they're kept in are well, it's disgraceful, because there'll be, say, in New Zealand anyway, 45,000 per shed, perhaps, and they're babies, so they've been separated from their mothers. They only have each other around, you know, but they live in their dirt, their own, you know, waste for the entire time that they're alive, which isn't long, because as I said, they're basically chicks when they go to slaughter and eat. And that nobody knows about this, but I mean the environment, I mean the people who eat chickens don't really understand, I think, where they come from, what's happening in their practices, the farming practices. But you know, they're so automated now that humans don't even really go in there unless it's to put them into the sheds and then to remove them for slaughter, which is also disgraceful, because by the time they're picked up for slaughter, their skeletons can't hold them up any longer. They've grown, the muscles have grown so quickly. So they're basically disabled and diseased birds that people are eating. They've been lying in their own waste. They can't stand anymore. Their bodies are unhealthy, and they've led lives from the start of great misery. And it's one of the great hidden or concealed aspects of chicken farming. Same happens with pigs. I would guarantee that most people who eat pork and bacon don't understand the farming practices that are involved with that. So, you know, giving more space, yeah, but I mean, it's even free range chickens and pigs still have the same kinds of time limits on their lives. The males are removed from the egg industry straight away. They go down the chute within 24 hours and they're killed, because they're not of use to a system that doesn't want to exploit the reproductive bodies of female animals. So same happens in the pig industry with those pregnant sows. I think they only live for 2 years when they could live for up to, you know, 12 or even 15 or longer. Well, Steve would know most about pigs.
Yes, Steve, maybe you could tell us a bit about a little bit about Esther. And I know that seems like but it's sometimes we focus on this kind of other end of looking at the factory farmed animals that we maybe forget a little bit about the animals behind the animals. So could you tell us a little bit about Esther and your story?
It's a particularly interesting segue when you were just mentioning how the or Annie's just mentioning how these chickens go off to market and their bodies can no longer, their frames can no longer support their bodies, and these animals are bred for a purpose. And pigs are the same. They're bred to get really big really fast, and these health issues that we've been dealing with, Esther, are because of that, because they're seen as products, right? They're just a product. And so, yeah, sorry, hit particularly hard because I see her behind me. So I'm looking at her, seeing the video and hearing the talk. I'll get it together. Just give me a minute. But it's hard with pigs. I mean, like we say, they do a really good job of keeping it hidden from everybody. People don't really know where their food comes from, and they definitely don't know the emotional lives and the complexity of these animals' personalities and how uniquely individual they are, when they're quite literally, just a number, in a system, right? So we talk about things like this. Well, this, hey, we're giving them this extra few feet, you know what I mean? And that's going to be great for all of these pigs. And you know what I mean? And it's taking into account one tiny aspect of pigs' lives. It doesn't take, we've got 50 acres here on the sanctuary, and I can tell you that those pigs move a hell of a lot more than a few feet a day. Like when they've got the opportunity, they put miles on. They start the day at the barn, they take themselves for a walk, they maybe spend a little while in a bog, and then they take themselves to the woods and they're digging in the woods, and then they come back dead on time when dinner's coming out. I tell you, you can set your watch by a pig. They know when breakfast is ready, they know when dinner's coming. There's a whole lot going on in their heads, and to think of them ever being thought to be okay to spend their lives in a gestation crate is horrifying. When you see what they want to do when they're given the opportunity to be who they want to be. That anytime I hear talk of these measures happening, and it's not just Prop 12 in the States, these kinds of laws are, thankfully, like you said, change is change, and it's great. And you hear these laws and changes coming in all over the world, but they seem like such tiny steps compared to what somebody who's in my position, that's seeing these animals from a completely different perspective and being able to see them in all their glory, being themselves and being who they want to be. To think of them in any other circumstances is absolutely devastating, and finding the right way to communicate that has been kind of our life's work over here at Happily Ever Esther. And how do we make people want to ask these questions? How do we make people want to know where their food comes? You know what I mean? Rather than, myself included, before I fell in love with a pig, I did this when one of those trucks went by on the highway. I didn't want to know. I was happy not knowing. I needed a reason to want to know, and Esther gave us that reason. And, so.
Yeah, she's a great communicator, and I'm hoping that we're going to talk quite a bit today about like communication and how we've accessed that, and how we hope communication, whether through sanctuary work or education or videos or writing. I think all of you do awesome kind of communicative work. Mark, do you want to jump in there?
Oh, I was just going to respond to what Steve said. I mean, I totally support everything you said, and maybe it relates to communication, but I always say who's for dinner, not what's for dinner. And that always, it's changed a lot of people. I've had people write to me saying they never really thought of it that way, and focusing on sentience and emotions, not cognition. I mean, this, it doesn't, if you will, dumber individuals don't suffer less than more intelligent individuals, if you will. And with pigs, maybe some of you know this, but I always call bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches Babe lettuce and tomato sandwiches. And it really works, because when I do kids events, they're shocked when they say, "Oh, you mean bacon, lettuce, and tomato?" And I say, "No, Babe." And a lot of them know the movie Babe, of course. So I think, I mean, for you all, this is, common knowledge that the words we use are really, really important. And the other move I use a lot when I'm talking to people is bringing it home. Would you do it to your dog? And I saw that in a video, and people go, "Well, what do you mean?" And I'll say, "Well, dogs, pigs, cows, lots of so-called food animals, they're all mammals. They all share the same array of deep emotions. They're all sentient beings." And I used to do a lot of work in China with Animals Asia and Jill Robinson, and they're called Asia Wild now. And I used to get criticized by people, mainly in the States. They'd say, "How can you go to China? That's where they eat dogs and cats." And I would simply say, "Well, I just left the States where they eat cows, pigs, other mammals." But I think that's a good way in, bringing it home and being nice. I mean, beating these people because they haven't thought about this kind of stuff is useless. But that's all I want to say. I thank Steve for all you're doing, and I hear you. I think one of the picture on the poster is me saying hello to a pig named Winston, who I pass constantly when I'm riding my bike out in the country out around Boulder. And,
Nice.
And we talk to him, and he comes up and he snorts, and I think he gets to know us. But it's also because pigs don't have such expressive faces. That's another block that I see. People will say, "Well, we don't really know how they feel." I said, "They're mammals."
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
It's a time thing, I mean, the more time you spend with them, you'll hear it in their voices, and it's those noises that they make to you. Like I can almost hear it. I can imagine, if he's happy to see you and you're coming up to that fence, the noise that you're getting is kind of like a quick, sharp, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're excited to hear you. That's the noise. That's happy noise. And so they've got all these different sounds, and all of their voices are unique. You can walk into our barn at night and you'll hear somebody grunt and you're like, "Oh, that's April," or like, "Oh, that was Captain Dan." Like they've got their own voice as unique as our voices. And I'd love to think that, that they are talking to each other, and it makes perfect sense to them. If we can understand some of the things they're saying, they must know exactly what they're talking about.
Naming them is critical.
Right?
Like you said, April. I mean, I always, calling animals by name is.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we don't number our dogs, and
right.
And
yeah.
I mean, I used to have a dog called 13 because she seemed to be the unluckiest dog in the world, but she also had a nice human name. But naming them and really calling people out when they say things that are just dumb, like, "Oh, they're just pigs," and stuff, and being nice about it. But I do think that, and the only other thing is I agree with Jeff's and other people's assessment of Proposition 12 is that, but a lot of people are fooled by it. I've had emails saying, "Oh, you see, you're complaining, pigs are getting more space," and I don't answer the nasty emails, but I just say, do the math. A couple of more square inches means that nothing to them.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks. And thank you, Steve. Yeah.
I think what all of you have really kind of highlighted there is just also the significance of them as individuals. When you speak about naming the sounds, the movements, I think, and perhaps Dana, you can tell us a little bit about this, because I think sometimes we lose sight of individuals when we, even in advocacy work, we sometimes do this move to speak about animals as this kind of like monolithic group, right? And we'll have these poster children for victimization, or these poster children for trauma as well. And sometimes I think I know for me, the second I realized that these were actual animals, like when I see a pig, all those pigs we saw in those videos, those are individual pigs that experienced that. This is not some idea of a pig. Those pigs existed. And it hits me every time. So in your art, in your work, you really do capture kind of animals in a animals and politics in a really fascinating way. So could you tell us, does this play into it at all when you're trying to grapple with these ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes a little bit also kind of to what Steve said, like until he met a pig, or however you phrased it, a pig that you fell in love with. It's that humanization. So, I come from, I'd always painted humans. So when I started painting animals, they had a very human quality in twofold, because it's what I did. And it's because that's how I see animals. I humanize them. I give them that, it's personal, and I want people to see them as more than an animal, more than a number. So the meeting a pig, for me, my favorite story, one of my favorite stories to tell is, I paint a pig, and a friend bought a painting that I did of a pig because she thought it was cute. She is a bacon eater and a bacon lover, and ha ha ha, I'm gonna buy one of your paintings and hang it on my wall in my kitchen because I love bacon. But she admitted, and I give her credit for admitting it, she brought it home and she knew that I painted it, and she knew why I painted it, and it made her feel guilty every time she ate. Now, I don't know the end of the story. I'd like to say, so she became a vegetarian. Let's pretend that happened, but we all know it probably didn't. But at least it's that one example, and I've had a lot of examples that I know it makes a difference. I know both the people who buy my work who know why I did it, and even those people that don't know me personally or don't know personally why I painted it, they make an impact. I've heard enough stories of minds that have been changed. For me, my earlier art on the subject of animal rights and veganism was much more strongly worded, not the right word, much more strongly imaged. It was very much like bang you over the head with a hammer sort of imagery. It was very brutal, because when I first started learning about, I was a vegetarian on my own, like sort of at heart since I was a kid, I say, and officially became a vegetarian in my 20s or 30s. How old am I now?
The eternal question. How old am I? Every year I find myself asking that, and I think I just stick to
How many years? It's really been a lot of years of being vegan now. But that shift from vegetarianism to veganism, when I learned about it through an organization that I was working with at the time, it was called Compassion Over Killing for many years, founded by the wonderful Arukah Meyer. I'm forgetting what they're called now. Arukah and Compassion Over Killing is what helped me make the shift. And when I learned about the milk industry, not just the meat industry, I felt the need to scream it from the rooftops. And my paintings were, like I said, they were brutal. They were graphic, and they made an impact. It's, I think, what helped give me a name in the art world and as a vegan or animal rights activist, whatever the words. But they only resonated, and I think we probably would all agree with this, a lot of what we do and say resonates best with those who already agree with us. And it's the learning over time how you can make a better impact on how you approach it. So over the years, partly after I got it out of my own system, I also learned how I could make a better impact is by softening the message a little bit, taking some of the blood and gore out of it, and just sometimes painting animals that had that very human quality to their eyes made a much broader impact. And I felt I was making more of a difference that way. A little less satisfying because I kind of like making a statement. I admit I love the really getting in there. But yeah, I've shifted to a kinder, gentler Dana and kinder, gentler paintings. And I think they make a much greater impact. And that's something that I really applaud you guys doing, that the pledge is to not be perfect. It's something I try to talk about in all my interviews. Like, I don't expect perfection. I applaud someone who does meatless Mondays. I don't berate them for having meat the other 6 days. My first approach is to say thank you for doing one.
Yeah.
Can I just say something?
Sorry, Annie's got her hand up, and then I'll jump back to you, Mark.
Well, that's great.
Go ahead, Annie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Dana, that I think what you were talking about is so important in education too. I have found, because I teach 3 courses in critical animal studies, and my main purpose is to get people to think more critically about their relationships and practices with animals, and also how they understand animals. And so I tend to start off by showing the natural lives of a particular animal. Like we'll stick with pigs, say, how they live in the wild. And then, because I'm talking mainly, like there was 90% of my students will eat meat and dairy and so on. And then I use art or popular cultural references that are less threatening to the people in the audience who are still eating meat. So for teaching about animal rights involving pigs, I might use Okja as a movie. Do you know Okja? Yeah.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of just, it distances them personally from feeling bad about what the movie's talking about. And then after the movie, I will turn to the realities of the lives of pigs. But they've had this kind of, they're able to somehow distance themselves so they don't feel blamed. And I also use art, not just, I use a lot of art, like your kind of art, but also performance art. I don't know if everyone knows of Yvette Watt. She's a Tasmanian artist, and in my lectures on against hunting, she has performed wonderful a piece called Duck Lake, like Swan Lake. So they play the music from Swan Lake really loudly on the first day of duck hunting season. And they perform Swan Lake in pink tutus on the water where the hunters have gone. And of course, the ducks notice the music, number one, so they're not going to do anything that gets them hunted then. But as you can imagine, it really pisses off the hunters on there. But, humour is a good way also to teach this, I think, because a lot of Yvette's work is about humour. So it's hard, when you think about how hard it is to bring humour into these situations, but that's a perfect way. Like the class laughs at that, but they also see how serious it is, because at the end she's showing ducks that have been injured and so on. So, and the other way that I teach about this is by using the works of people like artists as well. And this is where I get to just do a little promo for Carol Gigliotti, who I hope is in the audience. This is her book, The Creative Lives of Animals, endorsed by Mark. And Carol has written an awesome book just published at the end of last year about the actual creative lives of animals. So how they are creative in their own lives, which is something that people haven't really thought about either. We're thinking about emotions now and social lives and cognition, but and this is really mind-blowing for my students if they get a chapter from this. I've never thought of animals in this way before, but if you can show them how pigs are creative, you have to think of
or is powerful, or can really kind of inspire a different kind of train of, because we've all, since like young, we've kind of got the same way of thinking, right? Those groove patterns are kind of the same, and you break it out and you're like, wow, pigs do amazing things. And bowerbirds, because even when we see creativity, we tend to see it kind of in this like nature documentary kind of, it's like this packaged thing, and we don't really think like, oh, there's an actual animal like thinking and doing, and this is really kind of remarkable. Mark, you had your hand up a moment ago.
Oh, I was just going to say, responding to Dana, you use the word anthropomorphism, and people who know me I don't talk about it anymore. It's useless. But I was just writing something recently because somebody came at me, and I'm a pretty nice guy. And what came to me was, it's not being less anthropomorphic to say that an animal is happy than they're miserable. And I had written something about anthropomorphic double talk. And at least we had a good discussion, because I'll say, well, you say that pig is happy, and I say they're not. And you say, oh, you're just being anthropomorphic. And I'll say, oh, but aren't you being anthropomorphic too when you say they're happy? And it's usually a conversation stopper. And I really don't teach much anymore, but I don't even talk about anthropomorphism, because I call it one of the A cards. People use it against you, and then you could get into a pissing match with them and it goes nowhere. But just remind them that to say an animal is happy is equally, quote, anthropomorphic. The other thing about positive advertising, positive art, so I've really been part of compassionate conservation movement for a really long time. And there's been a change in, like, you want to talk about elephants, you don't show a cut up elephant, a chopped up elephant, you show an elephant mother with their children, or a cow with their child. And it's language again, because a lot of journals and magazines won't let you talk about children. Biologists talk about offspring or their young, but they're their children. And when I use that, you could just see people just really go, oh, they they don't like thinking that these youngsters are actually the chickens or the pigs or the cows' children. And I think it's really had a powerful effect among the people I know who are not, they're just not going to look at cut up animals and stuff. And I know some people say, you know, well, that's just the reality. To me, the reality is balancing it, but going more to the positive and talking about they don't like their kids being kidnapped. Just, yeah, Steve. Oh, I should.
Yeah,
you should.
Thanks, Mark. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's so important, that is recognizing that there are certain things that even if you're participating, like eating meat, that you're hardwired to ignore and to look away from. And the graphic imagery and that kind of approach, you know, is something that I myself ignored, you know, actively would do everything I could to avoid and to not look and to not see it. And all it took was being able to relate to them. You know, it took no one to get to meet the pig. And that made me not able to look away. It had that opposite effect, right? All of a sudden, what I spent my whole life trying to ignore, I needed to know more, you know, and that really became the whole focus that we do. And I got to say, it's kind of, I feel a lot better now, because when we first started this panel and everybody was talking, I looked at my friend that's in here and I said, I'm way underqualified to be on this panel. When people are talking, I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? And so to hear you guys saying all this stuff, I'm like, well, that's exactly kind of what we do, you know, as we try to make it personal. You know what I mean? Esther is just like Phil. She's just like Gary. She's just like the rest of the family. You know, all those same character and personality traits, and she's funny and mischievous and, you know, loving and loyal and all of these things, you know, that make people say, and, you know, it's when we get those messages. I went shopping and I picked up a pack of bacon and all I could think of was Esther. You know, all I could think of was Esther and I had to put it down. That's when we know, you know what I mean? We didn't have to say a word.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have to say a word. We just had to make them relate. And that is the seed, and that I found has been so critical in us being able to reach people the way that we have.
Yeah, we need more people like you. I mean, I'm not anti-academic, and some people agree, but the changes aren't coming from academics. They're going to come from people on the ground. I mean, what my feeling is, what we do is important, but
it is. It is. And that's the other thing I've got to be really careful of too, right? As much as I say, I don't want to see it, I don't want to look at it, there's got to be people out there getting that footage, getting that information, because we need to look at it at some point. You know, we need it available to us. So it's not a matter of I don't want to see it or ever want to look at it, but it's you know, we got to find a way to get people to want to know, and we got to find what that step one is, that first seed is that makes people want to look.
Well, what I'm saying is we need people like you. We don't need PhDs sitting in their labs torturing mice.
Fair. Yes,
mice have
fair.
emotions. I mean, give me a break.
Right.
So I really think we need to get your story out, your stories of what you're feeling and the shared emotions, because that's what Joe Blow and Mary Blow in Kansas City are going to respond to. They're not going to respond to academic papers that you're lucky if your family reads sometimes.
But it's also the effects of those papers, I think. You know, if you've got people doing research on mice, like you've got industries, you've got jobs caught up in there, you've got people thinking medicine comes from this. Like it really is a big, messy, thorny thing. Dana, then Annie, straight after.
Yeah, just building on that point, it does, I believe most strongly that the change is only going to come when we do it individual. It's like, it's got to be on a micro level, not macro. First off, if people hear big picture stuff, it's too much to digest. And so it's that personal connection. It's the individual who makes an individual change. Like I said, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, one meal, whatever it is. That's where the changes are to be made. Of course, Prop 12, fantastic. We need that too. But so many things frustrate me. But one major thing that frustrates me is when I'm a big news junkie as well. I watch the news and say, for example, we're talking about financial and inflation all the time, and they always talk about the cost of eggs and the cost of bacon. Never once in all of my million hours of news watching has anyone said this is partly caused by, you know, pandemic, by the culling of millions of chickens that just wiped out this population and that population of pigs. Like that is part of the cost of bacon and chicken and eggs going up. So I don't even know where I'm going with this, like the media blindness to it.
Yeah.
Is very frustrating. And the little things you can do anytime they talk about global warming or anything, there's never an effort for even one errant news person to be like, but you could make a change. Just do this one little thing, do your one little part. So I'm a big proponent of little steps. What's the saying? Don't lose the progress you can make for the sake of perfection. There's a much more eloquent way.
I was just going to say little steps make big steps. So yours sounded much better than mine.
Yeah, like don't throw out the progress in lieu of trying to be perfect. So yeah, we should have more tools about how to do our little parts and give people little tools that they could embrace, because they are going to close their eyes at the videos and they are going to turn off their ears and their brains when you try to give them the, this is terrible and it's too much to comprehend. So I wish everyone had better tools. All of us could learn more tools to make little changes in a lot of places. I'm just very much against people throwing quote mashed potatoes on a piece of art to do a protest. All of that. It's maddening. That's not the right tool. End of rant. Next person.
Annie, go ahead.
I just want to, as an academic on this, challenge a little bit that idea that nothing good comes from academia in relation to people changing their attitudes to animals. I've been teaching for 20 years in the area of critical animal studies now. My main teaching is against industrial farming and any other kind of animal exploitation. And every year I'm blown away by the meat eaters in the class. So there was 90 last year in one of my classes, which was called Animals and Popular Culture. So it doesn't sound like it's got anything animal rights here involved in it, but every single class is based on an issue. And I do show graphic material in it. Mainly I show popular cultural material, but towards the end, I think they've had enough that they can, they know enough to be able to take responsibility for their viewing. If they don't want to watch, they don't have to. At the end of those courses, I always get at least 20 students writing personally to me to say how it's changed their lives. And so I don't think you can underestimate educational teaching at university level. There's a lot of people doing it now, and we have a centre specialising in it. But what I'm most proud of in my academic teaching is that we have established a doctorate in human animal studies, and every single person who takes that doctorate, mostly from overseas. So we have currently people look at, Emily Major has just graduated, and she looked at anti-possum rhetoric in New Zealand. She looked at possum advocates actually and how they were challenging the horrible hatred of possums here. We've had Cressida Wilson recently looking at rape culture within animal rights movements. So I don't think we can just say that academia, nobody reads it, nobody pays any attention to it. It's actually really important, because these are the young people now who are coming through to become, they're really fired up academics, but who are also scholar activists, they're animal activists, as well as being able to, use their authority, not as scientists. They're not scientists, they're critical animal studies scholars. And so they're interdisciplinary. And I think it's really important that isn't seen as a pathway for people that will lead to them not being effective in the animal rights movement. They are effective. You only have to see our students in action, and they're very effective. And they know stuff, which means that they can answer any question that's thrown at them. So I think it all it's all important, it's all relevant, and it all comes together, and it's in different ways. But I can actually vouch that many students in my classes have become vegan because of what they've viewed and how they've been educated, and they're made to read this stuff themselves. They have to read it for their assignment, so they can't escape it. It doesn't always have to be graphic. I mean, like this is a major game changer for the students in my class, and it's not talking about. It has got information that will make them think about animals differently.
So we're gonna go Jeff, then Mark, then Steve. But I think you've touched on something here, Annie. You've got everyone fired up. Go ahead, Jeff.
Everything everybody has said seems plausible, even though people have to some degree disagreed with each other. And I think that this is a reminder that it can be unhelpful to frame these questions about ethical and effective communication and advocacy in these binary, mutually exclusive terms. We often feel drawn to that. We ask, should we be abolitionists or regulationists, revolutionaries or reformists? Should we seek structural change or individual change? Should we do multi-issue or intersectional activism or single issue focused activism? And should we be confrontational or conciliatory, and so on down the line? And a big part of why this is not the best way to frame it is the answer is almost always, yes, we should do all of those things. In particular, we should have a broad, pluralistic animal protection movement that involves some people taking relatively radical approaches, some people taking relatively moderate approaches. It needs to be contextual. It needs to involve a division of labor. And so the question is not really, should everyone be academics or advocates, or should everyone be moderate and conciliatory or like radical and confrontational? The question is, what approach is best for this speaker and this audience, given these goals in this context? And that is going to vary from speaker to speaker, from audience to audience, from context to context, from time to time. And it will almost always be a matter of adjusting the ratios or tweaking the strategies, as opposed to, you know, writing off academics or writing off advocates or writing off the moderates or writing off the radicals. And I did not take Mark, for example, to be writing off the academics. I took him only to be saying that the advocates are very important too. And if anything, we need more people on the ground doing that kind of work. And Donna, with respect, I will also, for that reason, defend the mashed potato throwers to some degree in some context. I think having some people prepared to engage in nonviolent illegal direct action, even if it makes other people feel alienated by them, it can still in all kinds of indirect ways be helpful. It can shift the center of debate, make the moderates seem more reasonable in comparison. It can do all sorts of things to move the conversation and make the issue more salient, which is not to say that 98% of the time that is the right move, but it is to say that when you need a broad pluralistic movement, sometimes you need people doing really different things and seemingly conflicting things, and even disagreeing or being angry with each other, and all of that is necessary.
With that, I respectfully still disagree, but that's...
Go ahead, Mark.
No, I totally agree. I when Annie was saying, no, I meant more academics in response to what Steve was saying, is we need those sorts of stories. We need the paintings. We need the popular media like Carol's and many other people's books to get to the public. I mean, because if you look at the titles, which I do, of some papers say about pig vocalizations, about cow emotions, I can't understand the titles. So why don't they just say pig facial emotions, or the vocalization, the emotional vocalizations of pigs, rather than talking about spectrographic analyses? I mean, because, I write a lot for Psych Today, I review books. I mean, there's been papers and books I've missed until somebody said, why don't you write about this? And I said, well, I read the title and I read the abstract and I had no idea what they were talking about. And it's not because I'm that dumb, but no, I agree with you. I don't mean I've turned in that way. A lot of my students have become anti-zoo advocates. They become their own research in compassionate conservation. They've gone to using non-invasive methods. So I agree with Annie and I agree with Jeff that we really need a very broad view. But what I was trying to get to when I listened to Steve, and I get stories every day because people want me to write about them. I want to hear your stories about how you fell in love with your pig, maybe not even knowing that, she's, an emotional being, just you felt those shared emotions. The emotions are the social glue. And what I'm trying to do is get people to come out and admit that. People say that compassionate conservation, there's been papers saying it's too feminine. Now, I mean, really, there's been criticisms of that. And I'm going, oh, well, that's a compliment. I mean, it's okay to talk about compassion and heart in conservation and in research. So anyway, thank you for Jeff and
Everybody.
Dana, everybody. No. This is a really important discussion for people to hear.
No, it really is. Steve, you wanted to add something there too?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, everybody else has said it, and I've not said it probably a lot more eloquently than I will. It's yeah, the whole idea that we need all of these different approaches to reach as many people as we possibly can, whether it be academics or excuse me, people like me that live with a pig. You know what I mean? That there's a spot for everybody, that it's one of those topics that's can be really tough to get through to people, and different approaches are going to resonate with different people.
I really like the word subversion kind of with this, because it makes me think we all, so often I feel when people think of this change in your mind as though it's some sort of like a light switch, like, oh, there's this, and for some people that is what happens, right? You have this moment, and it's, and I know like the moment when things changed in my mind, and it was a fish in a tank in South Korea. And I was already vegan at this point, right? Like I was already vegan, but I had this moment where I saw a fish in the tank, and I realized that fish, that was that fish's life. And something happened in my brain where I can't go back. Something happened. But this was through a kind of, I like to imagine ideas as like this perfect vase. We think we've got this perfect vase, and then people throw, like you see someone throw mash at a painting, or you see you have a really impressive lecturer, or you visit a sanctuary, and all of these things, like Jeff was saying, are kind of pluralistic stones at an idea, until eventually that idea cracks and folds. And that's what I think the journey is for a lot of folks. But the one concern is we are living, I think, in just this moment of absolute kind of crisis, where, and not just at a global level, I think people individually, personally, in relationships are just feeling so much pressure. So I think the anger is valid as well. But how do we, and I think the idea of this kind of slow moving change is how good change happens, how sustainable change happens. But there's always this kind of concern of, is it happening at the pace we need it to happen? Right? Any thoughts on that?
You
Go
better
ahead.
be very patient.
But how do you be patient in a world or at least where you feel like there is no scope for patience? And maybe this is the thing to guard against, is that kind of feeling of like existential dread. Like maybe that's the wrong way to frame things. Annie, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know what's happening in the States, but I was just teaching something last week about a sort of a study that's come out in New Zealand, a polling company who usually does political polls, polled what's happening with, consumption in New Zealand with dairy and meat. And what was amazing to me was how the group that is increasingly turning away from meat and dairy in New Zealand are young men. And I felt that it was a really awesome change. So to me, that's just showing something amazing, that 20 years ago, I would never have, women were leading everything to do with vegetarianism and animal rights and so on. But that was a major change. And 1 out of 10 people in New Zealand is now vegetarian or vegan. That's huge. That's what's at 10%. So, and we've just seen explosion of foods that we can buy in supermarkets here now, and restaurants that cater only for plant-based. So I think things have changed, and quite rapidly here within the last 10 years that's happened. And I think it's part of the whole climate change awareness as well. But also it's quite a huge thing in New Zealand, because our whole thing is about agriculture, because our economy, we keep getting told that farmers are the best of our economy here, and the government's investing in plant-based meats now. So that's a huge change for New Zealand. I don't know what's happening elsewhere though, but I've just felt really hopeful about that. And it's not just about animal suffering, but it's also the environmental aspects.
Yeah, and that's something I hope we'll have a spot of time to talk about, is kind of, because at the end of that video, there was this moment where they showed kind of the factory farms happening in China, and those massive kind of, and even here, you're getting a lot of alternative meats, alternative milks. There's a lot of kind of conversations about different kinds of technologies and ways of eating. So what does the future of our food system look like? And I think that we have to have that conversation. It's one thing to look at our existing food system and say it's broken. It's another thing to say, well, what world do we want tomorrow? Jeff, I know you had your hand up. Do you want to step in?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, on behalf of the United States, things are not that good, as I think we all know. And in general, this is another situation where I think the truth is somewhere in the middle and a balance needs to be struck. There are some respects in which things have never been better in terms of the availability, affordability of plant-based options, including plant-based and maybe soon cultivated meat and milk and eggs. On the other hand, there has never been more meat production and consumption in the history of the world. And there are all kinds of other ways too, in which there are a lot of good signs and there are a lot of bad signs in competition with each other. And we all know that these issues are important and these issues are complex. And if we lean too much into the urgency and feel really rushed and impatient, then we overreach and pursue things that are unachievable or unsustainable. We hit burnout, we lose momentum. But if we settle into this sort of patient state of acceptance of the imperfect status quo because we know change is slow, then of course a lot of very bad things are going to happen that might not have needed to happen. And so I think this is, again, one of those situations where it has to be a little bit contextual, and we always have to push a little bit harder and a little farther than society seems to think is possible, but while being realistic and pacing ourselves and caring for ourselves and caring for our communities and knowing that this will take generational change. So yeah, I not going too far towards either end of that spectrum, urgency or patience, but just always trying to strike that virtuous balance is tough, but I think necessary.
Great, thank you so much. I can't believe we've been chatting for a while, so I'm going to open it up now to the audience. You're welcome to pop some questions into the chat and I'll send it through to our panelists as well. But feel free to put those in the chat and we can kind of keep talking here a bit while Greg is getting that together. I mean, I feel quite hopeful about what the future is looking like. I think I'm with Annie here. Like it's hard on any given day. You feel a bit tormented and hopeful at exactly the same time. Steve, could you possibly, is Esther with you in the room?
Hang on one second here.
We'd love to say hello if we've got a spot of time.
Absolutely. Let's go say hi. Hang on here.
And I love your sweater, by the way.
Oh, thank you. She just had her piggy dinner. Phil's cleaning up. Hey, Phil.
Oh, and who's that?
That's Phil.
Hi, Phil. Oh, hi,
What
Esther.
are you doing, baby girl? Hey, can you say hello?
How old is she now?
She's going to be 11 in July.
Wow.
Crazy.
11.
Yeah. So bless her heart. And we're dealing with, like I said, we were dealing with these mobility issues. You know, Esther is undeniably commercial pig and, you know, bred to get very big, very fast and you know, not bred for a long, healthy life. And so not only are we dealing with the mobility issues, but the other thing that comes with it is that, you know, vets have no idea what to do about it. You know, they're not taught, you know, how to provide, you know, palliative care to a senior pig because it's not worth learning, sadly. You know what I mean? I remember the very first time we went to the school here, University of Guelph, which is an amazing school and one of the best in the world. And she was 2.5. And the doctor, they came up, he says, well, you know, that's really old for these guys. And I said, no, you know, it's really old for the pigs in your world. It's not old for pigs, you know. And again, this is one of the vets at the hospital, you know, and it's not through any fault of their own. It's just that's the industry they work for. That's the system, you know. But to think that these are the people that are responsible for taking care of them, and that's kind of the mindset. Initially, it very much has changed, thankfully, and we've got really great relationships with these people, and it's been amazing. But you know, to think that that's just how the system is. And when she got sick, you know, they didn't have equipment big enough to diagnose her. You know, they're like, oh, we don't have a scanner big enough to fit her. And I'm like, well, that's your job. Like you're a large animal hospital. Like, I mean, the zoo comes to you. You know, what happens when you have a gorilla that needs a CT scan? You know, I think the unfortunate answer that nobody ever wants to really talk about is they get a new gorilla. You know what I mean? It's cheaper.
Absolutely. Yep.
it's cheaper than finding out what's wrong. It's cheaper than treating them. It's cheaper than, you know, buying a $500,000 CT scanner, you know? So, but nobody wants to ask those questions. And you wouldn't believe how quickly people said when they found out Esther was sick, call the zoo, call the zoo. And so we told people, you know, they don't have one, and here's why. Well, we got contacted by the zoo. They were furious that we had responded the way that we did. So, you know,
it's incredible when
people don't want to have.
Well, when you start to ask that question, how often do we see old animals? Like, and how often do we see aged? I remember, I can't remember the photographer's name, and I'm sorry, but I remember a photographer also doing an old goat and an old pig and an old cow.
Just like a couple of years ago, right?
These animals
I'll find her
old.
name. I have her name.
And it was so jarring because you realize then that we only ever see these animals as young beings. Why is that? And then you start to ask these questions about healthcare. No, well, they're designed to, as Annie mentioned at the beginning, right? These animals are designed to die young, and then they live with massive health complications. And I think thinking through that, what it means to be bred to die young, is just a horrible.
Most of these animals, right? The sad reality, most of the animals, the day that they're born, the date that they're going to die is already determined. You know, they're going to be in the barn for X number of weeks or X number of months. So they know your death day, the day that you're born. And that's the sad life for most of these animals.
And it's a lack of imagination to think, I think, beyond that.
Yeah.
Mark, I know you have to leave us a little bit earlier than the others. Perhaps you want to jump in here as well. I don't want to, you're such a great panelist, and I'd hate for you to leave without giving us more.
Well, first of all, the woman's name is Isa, I-S-A Leshko. And her amazing book is Allowed to Grow Old: Portraits. I'll send you a link I did with an interview I did for her. No, I just have to do another talk, and I know this is going to sound blanky. No, I mean, when I say I'd rather be here, I'm looking forward to doing another talk. No, I mean, this is a great conversation, and I hope, you know, the people listening know that, I mean, even among us, I don't think there's a lot of disagreements, but we can disagree. I just think stories are the way to go. And in stories, I use poetry, I use literature, I use art, you know, to get out to a broad audience. I mean, before I left the university, I was always criticized for writing, when I say, you know, books for a popular audience. And I mean, I never knew what to say to my colleagues. Dale Jameson, who many of you know, was my colleague here and still a great friend, you know, in Boulder. And, you know, people would say, well, why don't you write another book like Species of Mind, which was a book I wrote with a guy named Colin Allen, which was really one of the first, if you will, philosophical biological books. And I told him that a friend of mine who has insomnia used to read it before she went to bed, and she renamed it Species of Sleep, which I loved. She said, don't take it personally. And I said, I don't really care. But seriously, I mean, having panels like this and talking to the masses, however you get out, literature, poetry, art, music is really powerful. I think is really important. And I echo what Jeff was saying about being pluralistic. We just hired a new head of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife here. He's a blessing. And people would say, well, is he vegan? Does he do this? And my answer was very simple. He's the best we could get. And I don't mean this in a demeaning way. He's an amazing man, but he's the best we can get into the position. They weren't going to hire a left-wing radical, I mean, and stuff. So we're making slow progress. And I'm using Colorado as a great example. We have a great governor. We have a great first gentleman. I work very closely with them. And we are changing on the ground, if you will, wildlife, the attitudes towards wildlife. I'm not sure how to say that, you know, but I love this panel, just getting all the different views in. But I think we all converge on one message. or maybe a few messages. Proposition 12 is great, but it isn't, it's just a drop in a huge bucket. It's like the head of a pin, but it's progress. And when people get upset, they don't realize the reality of what it's like to work out there. You know, the opposition we have.
Just to follow on to what Mark's saying, like, yeah, it's important that we get our message out to a broader audience. But I think this panel, what's so helpful is even talking amongst ourselves and different approaches. And my point that I keep going back to is that we don't need perfection. Mark, you're saying that you hired someone that was great for a position and someone asks if they're vegan, that saddens me. I mean, yeah, that'd be great, but that doesn't need to be the top question. We don't all have to be fitting into all the holes. I think progress is progress. I can't go back to that enough.
No, I totally agree. 100%.
Yeah, and I think that discussions among ourselves are so important because for me, I put these images out there and I sell my art to everyone, but the vegan paintings sell to vegans. And among that vegan community, among the animal rights community, it saddens me how much pushback I'll get. I'll go to a restaurant and someone will comment, "What do you eat there? They don't have vegan options." I was like, "Lay off, I had a drink." Like among ourselves, to be kinder and gentler and not expect perfection among ourselves, but share with each other the tools and how, like we've been saying, how to get the message out in 100 different ways. And just one thing to your question earlier, Claudia, asking about if the progress is fast enough. All of my kind, gentle, I think we need to do it in bits and pieces and individuals. But on the flip side of that, I'll contradict myself and say that's not going to make very much progress very quickly. I can get a little pessimistic and think it's going to take some sort of catastrophe for the news to get out to everyone, the dangers of the meat industry. Like recalls aren't enough because this batch of meat gets recalled and everyone goes back to eating meat, after they've gotten rid of that batch or whatever. So I don't want a catastrophe. I don't want a pandemic. I don't want another, bird flu or swine flu to come about. But those big events are what tend to make an impact. We have such pushback in this country from the meat industry. It's hard to make any progress because the news just sort of squashes any small progress that gets made out there. It's just not picked up on a broad enough level.
It's so interesting though, because I feel like I disagree with you. Like I'm on the flip end of you where I think like these big news events get everyone talking about it for a minute, but the kind of those sustained conversations I think are where people's minds actually change. So because it's very easy to hop on a bandwagon and be like, well, everyone's angry about it for this minute. And then you're like, okay, because I mean, I understand the urge to not be perfect. I think that this kind of perfectionism trap is a challenge. And I think when we stop being like assholes to each other, then we're like, I don't know if we're doing a good thing there. But on the other hand, I think that we mustn't use this as an excuse to also not hold ourselves to higher standards to say like, how can we do better, right? And sometimes I worry about the bandwagoning, like even in veganism, right? You're getting a lot of products that are just kind of flooding the markets, and it's trendy and it's great, and it loses some of its politics, right? This is a political thing. So that's kind of where some of my concern comes in a big moment, is that sometimes in the big moments everyone's in it for a moment and then it fizzles. But I agree with you, like maybe as coming back to Jeff's pluralistic idea, this is going to be our catch to, like maybe it's a combination of these things, like creating that fertile sorry, Annie, go ahead. Sorry, you got me really excited there. Now I'm like,
that's awesome what you said. I agree. And I just think I quite like the idea that Laurie Bruin has of aspirational veganism versus identity veganism. And the distinction for her is that, the identity veganism is more purist and it's trying to be perfectionist and it's can be judgmental of others, whereas the aspirational veganism, you can't be purely vegan ever. It's not possible, because if you take drugs, for your illnesses, you can't be. If you walk on the ground, you can't be. It's more about aiming to do the best you can in a world that doesn't really support you. And the other thing about aspirational veganism is that it's intersectional, which means you take into account the different contexts that people live in and how they may not be able to make the changes you'd like them to for various different reasons. It could be cultural, religious, all manner of different ways that people live in the world. You can't expect everyone to be like you. So it's little steps, but it's also having it as an aspiration rather than thinking of it in a pure context.
Right before this, I had lunch with somebody who's he's a large man, but he's a huge carnivore. And he said to me, I think we're going to become pescatarians. and he said, you probably don't like that. And what Annie just said rings true. I said, that's wonderful. And he said, oh, I thought you were going to give me a lot of blank about it. And I said, no, why? I said, why would I? I won't buy you lunch if you don't eat vegan, but no, I'm only kidding. But he wouldn't, for the first time in years at lunch, he ordered a veggie meal. I think he had little cheese on a salad. I mean, to me, people would say, well, that's not enough. Oh man, if you knew this guy, you just give him the Nobel Prize for whatever. I mean, so I agree. And I think we're at the point now where we have to accept these incremental changes, whether we think they're enough or not. But to me, the important thing, and obviously to you all, but to the audience, is we don't stop there. Proposition 12 is just a drop in the bucket. We don't stop. And, people don't know that the Federal Animal Welfare Act in the United States redefined the word animal to exclude mice and rats and fishes and insects and people don't realize that. And we've been pressing them a lot, and the scientists love it because they can continue torturing the animals. So there's things going on that we can change, but I've changed a lot of my views is take it while get it while you can.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think law is really so important here. We've spoken about Proposition 12, but there's a lot of fascinating, interesting, and really important work, I think, happening in legal spaces, questions of property. If we're talking about animals, we need to be talking about property relations. It's part of the reason why we get to treat animals the way we do. And it's because our world is dictated by the ideas of property and ownership. And that's a much bigger question than even just, veganism. We need to have these really hard conversations. Law really channels a lot of the decisions and the ways we can move in the world. And as you said, Annie, different people in different places, right? Different people in different places not only have social restraints, but they have legal restraints. They have economic restraints, and we need to be respectful of that, I think, is really an important point. And Proposition 12, I think, coming back to the beginning, where you having a decision like this at the Supreme Court, it's for the pigs on the ground. I think materially, I don't know what kind of change it's going to make for them right now. But in terms of what it means legally, in terms of how people think, like it is. And there are things happening. I do have a question. Sorry, I'm getting too excited. Okay, so the question is, obviously our current animal dominant food production and supply chain is unsustainable. What steps can we take towards a food supply chain that leans away from animal-based products and towards plant-based products sustainably? How does education and advocacy intersect? So how do we move more towards plant-based products, and how do education and advocacy help us to do that?
I think it's important as vegans. One thing that we got a lot of flack for on social media was throwing our support behind products like the Impossible Burger or the Beyond Burger, or people have talked a lot about, cultured meat is becoming a lot more talked about thing. And I think it's, from my perspective anyway, it's saving lives. You know what I mean? It's taking that focus away from these animals in barns and providing products. I didn't go vegan because I hated it. I have to admit that. And I don't think I should be ashamed as a vegan and as an advocate to admit, like, yeah, I did. I loved a burger with bacon. I did, and then I fell in love with a pig. That's why I went vegan. I didn't go vegan because I didn't love those products. And if you can give me those products in a vegan version, hell yes, bring it on. Because I think there's a lot of other people like me that really I hate to say they don't care what they're eating, but at the end of the day, they don't care if it's a pig or if it's a deliciously processed lentil that's been turned into, they don't care as long as it has that taste and texture that they love, you know, they'll eat it. And I think we need to support that as vegans, that these products, even though they may not be to our taste, you know, you may not want to eat an Impossible Burger because it reminds you of cow flesh. I get it. You know what I mean? But there are billions of people in the world that feel differently. So let's push those products and support those products and help normalize and encourage people, our non-vegan friends, to try these products that they might like, whether you don't like them or where they come from yourself. I think that's really important.
Yeah, but sorry, go ahead, Mark, and then Jeff.
No, I think you're totally right. And it's also I do need to go, but one thing that didn't come up, and I think Steve's comments are really prescient, is stop the infighting among people who share the same goals. Just stop it. I mean, really, I mean, it's just not worth it. And you know, don't get, I mean, you can get personally attached, but it's not like eponymously you're going to have the Stephen Jenkins law or the Annie Potts dictum. I don't know what you would call it.
Does sound pretty impressive. The Annie Potts dictum.
the
That should be the title of your next book.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like the actress. The actress would always get the
but I'd like to say that because I think the food issue is, I don't eat that kind of stuff. I just like salads and pasta and I like a lot of potato chips and French fries. But I really get tired of people just fighting publicly, because I've had a lot of people say, if you all can't agree, why should we listen to you? And I just say, we share the same common goals. There may be different paths to achieve them, but in such a blanked up world, we should take these little changes and build off of them. And really, like Jeff said, I think you just said, but I know working with Justin, how hard it is to get something like this done. I mean, my goodness gracious, most of these things are tabled. So anyway, thanks for listening. It's a great show. I better go, but thanks for organizing this, Robin and Sydney and Greg and everybody. So
thanks so much, Mark. We'll be wrapping up soon ourselves, but thank you so much for joining us.
Take care.
In terms of future-based things, I think it's really exciting though to also see how many investments are happening from countries into these kinds of things. Like, didn't Canada recently invest in pea protein? I think there's a huge thing going. So I think there are a lot of positives kind of on the horizon. So we're nearing the kind of 1.5 hour mark now. Before I kind of wrap up, is there anything you want to kind of add that you thought we didn't get to and you'd like to really just make sure that it's said when we're speaking here about animals, dignity, advocacy, a better world?
I think we covered a lot, and I just want to say what a privilege it has been to be on this panel with you guys. It really is. It really has been a joy to listen to your thoughts. It's, like I said, it's a really complex issue that you need to approach from so many different angles. It's really interesting to hear all these different thoughts out there.
It's been great having you here and meeting Esther and Annie. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say thank you, Steve, so much for showing me Esther. It was just amazing to see her. And I mean, that makes all the difference in a panel like this, to have an actual animal present. Well, we're all animals, you know what I mean, but not a human animal. I was looking around this room here to see if any of my cats were present, but they're not. They were before, sitting on their
typical
lap.
cats, eh?
Yeah, they do what they want. But thank you so much for having her there, because I think that made quite a difference.
Of course.
People's experiences of this. Yeah.
And especially having her in the room when we watched that kind of video at the beginning, because really, and I know I said it already, but it really does matter to me that sometimes we lose sight of the actual animal in the picture, right? Like if someone saw a picture of me, it would be, oh, that's Claudia, like that's Claudia. And having Esther in the room, or like Linus is curled up on the couch, or it really does make a big difference. Jeff, Dana, any final thoughts?
No, just a big thank you for having me a part of it. I'm not one to come out and talk about stuff. I'm used to just putting it on canvas. So I do enjoy it. I'm not that good at it, but thanks for inviting me.
I think you're awesome.
Oh, Thank you.
I think you kind of did a great
I was
job.
thinking there with a little paintbrush in hand to talking about my feelings. But once I get started, like there's so much I do want to talk about. So I appreciate being part of the conversation and be happy to be in more conversations. I just bottom line think conversations, the best thing we could do to help move everything forward. It's the only way we need to communicate with each other and with the broader audience.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah, and I can just also say briefly, it was obviously great to talk with everybody here and with the people who showed up. Thank you everybody for being here. And just to reinforce what people are saying, obviously conversation is important, but specifically for issues like these, issues that affect everybody, issues that require people who work in the humanities, the social sciences, the natural sciences, advocacy, policy, art. You need all of these different approaches in order to fully kind of understand and like properly respond to these sorts of issues. And so not just having conversation, but having conversation with academics and advocates and artists and everybody in the room, I think is really important. So I really appreciate everybody for convening that and people being here and having this conversation tonight. Thank you.
This is the most polite panel ever. Everyone's just been like so supportive and wonderful and nice. But not like we've pushed against one another, but it's been really wonderful. Annie?
Yeah, I just want to thank Robin, especially because she's been emailing me back and forth, and it's been a pleasure to email her. And also, I just wanted to end my bit, I suppose, saying that I do have hope. And I see these young people coming through in my classes who have already they're already aware. Whether that's come from environmentalism, their interest in, combating climate change, or whether it's because they're more aware of animals as individuals and sentient beings. It doesn't matter. They're just, wherever it's coming from, there's a groundswell there at that younger generation that gives me hope.
That's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear it. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for being here today. For those of you who are listening in, don't forget to check out the website. Once again, the link is in the chat. The pledge is there. As we've said, make incremental steps. Baby steps are good steps. So sign the pledge, go dairy-free once a week. And if you're already dairy-free, awesome, but still go and sign the pledge because it's awesome. And there are gifts/prizes and awards to be had. So if you go and sign up within the next week, you might be getting a little something in the post. So it's very, very fun. The website's great. And thank you, Steve, Jeff, Annie, thank you so much. Also to Mark, who's left us. It's been a wonderful launch. Arukah Animal International is officially launched. Cut. Yay!